name, where you're from, and why you're tuning in tonight. I'm gonna open up the chat here so I can give you guys some shout outs. Um, has anybody joined yet? We are on. We're recording. Wow, there's lots of people on. Let's see. I see Karna saying hi. How you doing, Karna? Thanks for the emojis. Love to see the floaty things come floating up. Really appreciate it. Carol in Bloomfield, Michigan. Nice to see you, Carol. Great to have you here tonight. Um, whoa. All of a sudden it went really fast. I saw Alice in Bethesda, Alice in Colorado, Dave in Tongvaland, which for everybody else is Pasadena, California, but for Native Americans it's Tongva. Susan in Detroit, great to see you, Susan. She's one of our rock star phone bankers. Dana in Idaho, Marilyn in New Hampshire, Yasmin in Florida, Rosalie in McAllen, Texas, and the RGV, Rio Grande Valley, Jack in Boston, Barry in Toledo, Ohio, Steve in Evanston, Illinois, Erica in her car, but her car's in Seattle, so it's great to see you, Erica. Janae in Cleveland, Drew in Kansas City, Missouri. Great to see you, Drew. We're going to be doing and talking about Kansas City in just a little bit. Latanya in Houston, Steve in Indy. So many people. I'm going to come back to the chat in a little bit. If you guys are watching on social media, on Facebook, on Twitter, you can like and share this video. Those links are also getting dropped in the chat right now for the folks that are here to share it with your friends. We've got a pretty special call tonight. We've got Representative Jamie Raskin from Maryland on to discuss efforts to defend the right to protest from attacks by extremist right wings, from an extremist right wing at odds with free speech and our democracy. We'll also hear from Greenpeace USA, Deepa Padmanabha, who is going to talk to us a little bit on how corporations are using SLAPP suits, and you'll hear about SLAPP suits in just a little bit, to try and drain resources from organizations protecting the environment, public health, and more. We'll also hear from Mara Verheyden Hilliard. She's the executive director of the Partnership for Civil Justice Fund, and we're going to talk a little bit about anti-protest bills that are popping up all over the country. And we're also going to hear from Ariel Mojer of Friends of the Earth to talk a little bit about the newest iteration of Manchin's Dirty Deal. So for those of you watching on social media, you can join us here in the Zoom. That link is getting dropped in your social media channels now. It's a much more interactive experience. I see the emojis floating around. And you can engage with us more directly in the chat. So let's see, who else has joined us since that? I see Amy in DC. All right, Amy. Burton from Ohio, Scott in Houston, Texas, Tom in the Bronx, New York, Stephen in Bloomfield, Iowa. I see Tommy in Philly, John in Georgia, John in Juneau, Alaska. That's awesome. Janelle in North Carolina, Sherry in Los Osos, California, Rex in Philly, Gene in Boulder, Colorado, Mary in Wisconsin. So many people from so many different places. It's awesome to see all of us gathering together, creating a community. Catherine in Corvallis, Oregon, Nicole in New York City, Derek, who's running for city council in Lafayette, Indiana. Great to see you. A couple of, this is Lindora in Fayetteville, North Carolina. Ken in Cleveland, Erica, I already talked about Erica in Seattle. Emily from, how do you pronounce that? Emmaus, Pennsylvania. Emmaus, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. You can let us know in the chat how to pronounce that. Donna in Bandon, Oregon, Peggy in Michigan, Brighton, Diane in Cleveland. I wonder who that is. I have a sneaking suspicion I know. Brother Grace in Hartford, Connecticut, Gilda in Philly, Shem in Albany, California. I didn't even know there was an Albany, California. That's great. Janet in New Mexico, Susan in Santa Cruz. Shout out to Santa Cruz and all the rebuilding efforts going on over there. David in Connecticut. So let me continue here. Um, just a quick little background on what's going on with these SLAPP suits. So corporations are using SLAPP suits, that's SLAPP, that stands for Strategic Lawsuit Against Public Participation, to intimidate and silence organizations by burdening them with the costs of legal defense, right? The goal of these lawsuits isn't even necessarily to win. The lawsuits are really just designed to try and silence people, right? They're becoming really widespread, and it's a way for corporations to drain groups of time and resources. And like I mentioned, they have a chilling effect on all kinds of public interest work, from healthcare to workers' rights to democracy. So some of these lawsuits were originally filed by Michael Bowie. If folks don't know who that is, he's a former member of Trump's personal law firm. So we can imagine why that's happening. And Michael Bowie's actually publicly admitted that he has been in talks with other corporations to file more SLAPP suits. So we need to fight back, and we need to do it now and show corporations that they cannot slap us around or slap us into silence. So, and also right now, right, despite claims of taking climate change seriously, the Biden administration is doubling down on dirty energy with the Willow Project in Alaska and pushing forward with Manchin's dirty deal. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well towards the end of the call. Most of the folks here helped us stop the dirty deal, not once, not twice, but 3 times in 2022. And we're going to have to do it again to show that there's a real grassroots opposition to this terrible plan, which will move us backwards and not forwards in regards to climate change. So one last round of shout outs, and then we'll get started with our call and our first guest. So let me get to the chat once more. Let's see. I see Mary in Chicago, we already mentioned, but let me scroll a little bit. Stuart from Japan. Wow, that's amazing. It's great to see people from all over the world. Dennis in Michigan. Paulina is here. Ariel in Cincinnati. Kathy in Naples, Florida. Eric in Boulder. Kat in Sedona, Arizona. Katie in Brooklyn, New York. Donna in Longview, Washington. Bonnie Hunter in Novato, California. Stephen in Falls Church, Virginia. Tamara in the Coachella Valley, California. So many people. It's great to see all of you here. I see Boyd Walker in Alexandria, Virginia. Gwendolyn in Gainesville. I love that little play with words there. Vernon in Pittsburgh. Sasha from Portland, Oregon. Laurie in Vancouver, Washington. So many folks here. It's really awesome to see you all. So right before we get started with this call, and if you guys like to see the organizing we do here in our revolution, collaborating with groups like Greenpeace and others, if you want to help our activists like us fight back against corporate and right-wing attacks, be sure to pitch in to fund our work. We're putting that link in the chat as well right now. You can sign up, you can give us a monthly donation, whatever you can afford is great, and become a sustaining member of our revolution. If you can't afford to do that in this moment, and we understand it's not the easiest economic moment for folks, there will also be opportunities for you to donate your time, help us get some progressives elected, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So with that, I think we can get started. See if our first guest is here. Let me just double check with our panelists. I think he might be here, but we can get started. So our first guest this evening is Representative Jamie Raskin. He's a real champion for democracy and a friend of our revolution. We've been doing some work together for quite a bit of time now. And he's here tonight to talk to us a little bit about the right to protest and SLAPP suits. So you can put your questions in the Q&A, and we'll try to get to them if we have enough time. So give him a big Our Revolution welcome. I see all the emojis flying around. Representative Raskin, are you here? I don't think he's here yet. So we can give a couple more shout outs. Let me just double check that he's not on the participant side. I don't quite see him yet, but I see his staffer. So maybe he'll be here very, very shortly. In the meantime, let me give a couple more shout outs to folks while we sort this out. Let's see, who else is here today? Bob in Pittsburgh. I see someone else, Paulina in Clark County, Manije in Somerset, New Jersey, M. Sarah in Connecticut. So many people. Beverly in Denver. I think Alex is giving a shout out for the Green New Deal and Medicare for All. That's awesome. Let's see, Star in California, Paul in Tucson, Arizona. Go Wildcats. I was super disappointed by the NCAA men's tournament. It's my alma mater, University of Arizona. I see Asia from DC, Tammy Wilson. Let me see if we've got our guest here and get started. Representative Raskin, are you here yet? I don't see him yet, but he should be here shortly, I hope. Rachel, can you let me know if Representative Raskin is going to join us soon? If not, we can just flip it and he can be our second guest.
I think let's flip it. I'm trying to see if he says he's waiting to be admitted.
Oh, really? I don't see him. But let me just look really quick. I do not see him in here. He shouldn't need to be admitted, but I'm looking anyway. I don't see him anywhere.
I'm telling him to try again.
Okay.
Sorry, everyone.
No worries, no worries. So we'll flip it and we'll start with Deepa. Deepa, is that cool with you?
Sure.
Okay, great. So we'll come back to Jamie Raskin in just a second. But in the meantime, let me bring on Greenpeace USA's Deputy General Counsel, Deepa Padmanabha. She's here to talk a little bit about these SLAPP suits and what's going on with them, and then we can talk to Representative Raskin about his legislation around this. So if you have any questions for Deepa, put them in the Q&A. Deepa, really appreciate you joining us tonight. So tell us a little bit about SLAPP suits and what they're all about.
Yeah, thanks, Paco. Appreciate the warm introduction and your focus on this topic today. So sometimes we forget that behind every SLAPP there's actually a story. It's a story of resistance and of speaking truth to power. And while for us at Greenpeace, SLAPP has become somewhat of a household term, it's important that we actually stop to remember what is behind this acronym. SLAPPs are intended to crush First Amendment protections. The goal of SLAPPs is not to win, but to scare people into silence. So we at Greenpeace USA are very familiar with SLAPPs. We were served with 2 SLAPPs in 2016 and 2017, both of which we continue to fight today. So the first was filed by Resolute Forest Products, one of Canada's largest logging companies, for exposing the company's unsustainable forestry practices. And then a year later, in 2017, Energy Transfer, the company behind Dakota Access Pipeline, sued us for allegedly orchestrating the entire resistance movement at Standing Rock. So these suits originally included RICO claims. Yes, the Racketeer, Influence, and Corrupt Organizations Act. So you're probably thinking, wait, isn't RICO for criminal activity by the mafia? And that's right. These corporations tried to conflate the right to speak out against large corporations wreaking havoc on our planet with working for organized crime. These corporations are creating a new playbook to criminalize advocacy work. And here's the thing about RICO. RICO allows for the recovery of triple damages. So suddenly at Greenpeace, we were looking at one lawsuit seeking $300 million in damages and another seeking almost $1 billion in damages, all for exercising our First Amendment right to speak truth to power. These companies want us to be intimidated. They want you to be intimidated, and they want us to warn others to keep their mouths shut. But we always need to keep in mind that we will not be silenced and we will not be intimidated. We've been fighting these cases tooth and nail because we have to. Our existence is at stake. But we're not just fighting for us. From day one, Greenpeace took on the challenge of shutting down RICO because we know the implications RICO could have on all social justice movements. So with the tremendous support of our allies and incredible work of our legal counsel, we were able to get RICO thrown out of both cases. So what that means is, at least for now, we have shut down what could have been one of the biggest threats to organizing. But as I mentioned earlier, the fight isn't over and the lawsuits continue because these companies use other SLAPP tactics. SLAPPs are incredibly expensive to fight, and that's the whole point for these corporations, to waste our time and money. And this is time and money that we would be spending on protecting the planet and our communities. But like you, we won't stay silent, and we hope that you all will join us in this cause. These cases have forced us to move out of our comfort zone, to take on a First Amendment fight against corporations we never thought we'd have to fight. But these cases would be crippling if they were brought against an individual activist or even a smaller nonprofit.
Thanks, Deepa. So let me bring on Representative Raskin now, so we can talk a little bit about his legislation. So Representative Raskin, thank you so much for joining us. You're a real champion for democracy and a good friend of our revolution, and we're so happy to have you here. Tell us a little bit about the SLAPP suits, and this is a pretty serious topic, and you have a legislation that you previously introduced in the last Congress. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Sure, I'm delighted to be with all my friends from our revolution, and thank you for hanging tough, everybody, and being so strong for democracy and freedom and social justice in our country. So yes, I introduced legislation in Congress, which I also had introduced and gotten passed in Maryland, and it's anti-SLAPP legislation. SLAPP stands for Strategic Litigation Against Public Participation. And so basically it's when a big corporation will bring a lawsuit against people for exercising their First Amendment rights, and they don't have any real cause of action and no real opportunity to vindicate any right or benefit, but they're just trying to drive a community action group, a civil rights group, a civil liberties group, basically into the ground with litigation costs. So the anti-SLAPP legislation allows for a court to speed the process up and to hear a claim that this is a meritless, baseless anti-SLAPP suit right at the beginning of the litigation, in order to throw it out and then to impose penalties on the person bringing the legislation, because these kinds of lawsuits are a major threat to First Amendment political participation and the opportunity of communities to fight back against environmental contamination and kind of corporate railroading of the public.
Yeah, and so you had legislation in 2022. Are you planning to reintroduce that legislation this year?
Well, absolutely. We're going to put it back in. We don't have much hope that the Republican majority in the House will let it get out of the House, but we'll continue to educate around it and try to move it with our friends in the Senate, and let people know about the fundamental importance of getting this done. And if you hear music in the background, forgive me. I came to the Springsteen and E Street Band concert here to see my friends. So.
No, that's great. And I promise we won't take too much more of your time, but I just wanted to ask one more question. And that is, a lot of the state level anti-SLAPP legislation that's passed has passed in a bipartisan fashion, right? You just mentioned that you don't feel like it's likely that Republicans in Congress will be willing to do so. What other obstacles do you think that legislation faces at the federal level?
Well, we did have some Republican support in Maryland, and there's been some bipartisan support at the state level. Our problem with the MAGA Republicans now is they operate completely as a monolithic herd. And none of them are going to support it unless all of them are going to support it. And the only thing really all of them support at this point is Donald Trump. So, Lincoln's party now operates as a cult of authoritarian personality. There were a handful of Republicans who were interested in this in the last Congress, and I will try to work with them. But, I don't hold out a lot of hope that the Republican majority will actually put it on the agenda and allow us to vote on it now. But that just underscores the importance of us taking the House back, having a majority in the House, having a majority in the Senate, and then, continuing the legislative juggernaut that we really got started in the last Congress.
Great. Well, Representative Raskin, it's so great to hear from you. So great to see you and great spirits and being ready to fight for our rights to speak up and challenge corporations. So we really appreciate you joining us tonight.
Well, I so appreciate it. And we have many, many great battles to fight together. Hang tough, our revolution. I look forward to seeing everybody in person as soon as I get through my little medical odyssey here.
Absolutely. And we wish you all the best, and we're all rooting for you. So you got 500 people here in this Zoom, all cheering you on. You can see the reactions. Lots of love for you here, Representative Raskin. Really appreciate you joining us tonight.
I'm sending all my love and solidarity back. Thanks, Tom. Bye-bye, everybody.
All right. Thank you. All right. So, Deepa, I'm going to bring you back so we can continue talking about a couple of other things. So Representative Raskin described a little bit what SLAPP suits are all about. Can you talk to me a little bit about how they impact, our movements, right? Both the environmental movement, democracy movement, all the other movements that we're a part of.
Yeah, thanks, Paco. It's a great question. So one of the unique things about Greenpeace's story is that you're actually hearing about it, because we actually never hear about most SLAPPs. They're usually filed against the homeowner trying to protect their land from a developer, or an individual trying to ensure that their community has access to clean drinking water. Most SLAPPs are just filed against ordinary people who are advocating to protect basic rights that are threatened by corporate greed. So since most people and organizations don't have the resources to engage in lengthy and costly legal battles, the mere filing of a SLAPP often has the intended effect of silencing. And so these lawsuits really have to stop, and that's what Greenpeace is fighting for. One thing that I think is important for our community to know is that when the original lawsuits were filed with RICO, groups across issue areas did come together, and we formed a coalition called Protect the Protest, because we all recognize the threat that this tactic posed on all of our advocacy work. And it was clear that the intent behind RICO was to send a chilling effect on anyone thinking of raising their voice. And the message was, be quiet or you could be next. So we as a movement, as many movements, we need to send a message to every corporation or individual considering this tactic that your attempts to shut us down will only make us louder. And what we say in Protect the Protest is, when you go after one of us, you go after all of us. The truth is, we can't win this alone. We are fighting the legal fight in the courtroom, but there is also a movement fight, and the corporations behind these suits have to know our collective power.
And talking about, corporations, I think Representative Raskin mentioned that they might face, under his legislation, right, some consequences for filing SLAPP suits. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So the truth is, when we think about consequences for corporations that file SLAPP suit, it all depends on whether the case is filed in a jurisdiction where there is an anti-SLAPP law. So what anti-SLAPP legislation does is it creates financial penalties for those who file lawsuits that attack First Amendment protected activity, while still allowing legitimate lawsuits to move through the legal system as they should. So currently 32 states plus the District of Columbia all have anti-SLAPP laws. And we at Greenpeace have firsthand experience on how anti-SLAPP laws make a huge difference. Just bear with me for a second as I get into the weeds a bit. In our case, Resolute originally filed its case against us in Georgia, which had nothing to do with the case. But at the time, Georgia had a weak anti-SLAPP law. We successfully got the case moved to a more appropriate venue, which was California, that actually has a very strong anti-SLAPP law. And there we were able to recover one of the largest, if not the largest, fee amounts ever awarded under California's anti-SLAPP law. So what does that actually mean? It means that a court in California found that some of Resolute's claims attacked our First Amendment rights. So the court ordered the company to pay the fees that we spent defending these claims. The truth is, anti-SLAPP laws help level the unequal financial playing field between companies and activists. And so while they're not going to stop the suits from being filed, they do provide a significant deterrent. But for that deterrent to truly be effective, we need both federal anti-SLAPP legislation and anti-SLAPP laws in every state. Because absent these laws, the cost of bringing a suit for a SLAPP plaintiff is nothing compared to the potential benefit of silencing a powerful critic for several years or maybe even forever.
So I got a really interesting question in the chat, and hoping that this is something we can address. And the question is really, as shareholders, how can folks get involved on the corporate side of things, right? To try and change companies and corporations sort of filing these lawsuits from a shareholder perspective. Is that something that you see some value to?
Yeah, there's a lot of activism happening. We're seeing in amongst corporations. So showing up on shareholder meetings and voicing dissent is a very powerful way that change can happen. Change has to happen in so many ways. It has to happen from within, and it has to happen on the outside. And it also has to happen in the legal system. So really, this is a multifaceted problem, and we need corporations to take this on, to take this seriously, and actually pledge to not engage in this behavior.
Great. And so Deepa, what can folks do to help out in this case, in particular with SLAPP suits?
Yeah, so, first, the easiest thing is to let your representatives know that you support Representative Raskin's bill, the SLAPP Protection Act. And then on the state level, if you live in one of the 18 states without anti-SLAPP legislation, let your state representatives know that they should take a stand against corporate bullying. The other thing is that after nearly 7 years for Greenpeace, the Resolute Forest Products case is reaching its final stage. So on April 20th, we are going to be making our case to the judge that the lawsuit should be resolved in Greenpeace's favor without a trial. And this could be the end of the suit, or we could be going to trial in Oakland over the summer. Either way, we absolutely need your support. So there will be a rally on April 20th, the same day as the hearing in Oakland, California. So please, if you live in the area, please come to the Ronald V. Dellums Federal Building at 1301 Clay Street to show your support. But even if you're not in the Bay, you can still show up for this moment. We're going to be asking for support on social media. You can follow Greenpeace USA on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and help us amplify our message, because what happens on April 20th really impacts all of us. And just, I want to end by reminding folks that SLAPPs are driven by fear. Our movements are growing stronger than ever, and these corporations are feeling the force of people power. SLAPPs are a response to this fear, and they're a desperate attempt to put a price tag on First Amendment protected activity. And so really the most important thing that we can do in this moment is to make our movement stronger, louder, and more effective than ever, to really send a message that we will not be silenced.
Well, thank you so much, Deepa. Really appreciate you and the work that you've been doing around this, bringing it to our attention, and then inspiring us to take action. As Deepa mentioned, you can call on your representatives to support Representative Raskin's bill. That link is getting dropped in the chat now. And you can also, again, support Greenpeace on April 20th. That's only about 25 days from now in Oakland, so we can get that SLAPP suit thrown out. So thank you, Deepa, for joining us. Really appreciate you being here with us today. And so now I'm going to bring up our next guest. Really excited to have Mara Verheyden-Hilliard join us. Mara is the Executive Director of the Partnership for Civil Justice Fund. And she's working, there's two sides of the coin here, right? The corporate side is the anti-SLAPP suits that are being filed by corporations. But the other side of that coin, which is very related, is the fact that there's bills being introduced all over the country at the state level, which are anti-protest bills altogether. They're popping up in state legislatures all over the place. And Mara's here to talk to us a little bit about that. So Mara, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Really appreciate you being here. Tell us a little bit about the Partnership for Civil Justice Fund and what you guys are working on with these anti-protest bills.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm really glad to be here this evening with everyone and with everyone across the country. This is like amazing to see the number of folks who care so deeply about these issues, that everyone is here tonight and listening. My organization, the Partnership for Civil Justice Fund, and our project, the Center for Protest Law and Litigation, have as a core focus of our work fighting to defend movements for social justice across the United States. And I've done this work for more than 20 years, defending activists, organizations, political progressive groups, and people that are targeted for their First Amendment activities, targeted for fighting for what they believe in, targeted for trying to move our society forward. And what we're seeing right now, and for the last number of years on a national level, is really this resurgence of an effort to crush progressive movements and movements for social justice, this time around by using the power of the legislature. So in 20 states, there have been about 39 anti-protest laws that have been passed in the last sort of 6 or so years. And those laws range from new laws that take, for example, what might have been traditionally minor civil disobedience, misdemeanors at best, and turn them into huge level felonies. These are laws that include what are called critical infrastructure laws. Those are laws where the legislatures are passing laws that criminalize people who engage in protest in and around a facility that's designated as critical infrastructure. And when we first saw those laws, they were mostly after September 11th, and they were created on the basis that there needed to be protection of critical infrastructure in the United States. Most of these laws that have subsequently been passed have been completely paid for by the fossil fuel industry, and all of them are wrapping into the concept of critical infrastructure pipelines and the oil company and gas company interests to stop people and stop indigenous communities and others who have come together to fight these violent attacks on land and water throughout the United States. And these laws also have extreme penalties, expansive reach. Those exist in about 19 states. Some of these laws also go so far as to try and reach beyond any individual that they claim engaged in allegedly unlawful activity to reach a nonprofit or any other organization that they claim is affiliated. So if you start at the lowest level, the idea is that they're taking actions that in this country have traditionally been recognized as time-honored, cherished civil disobedience, or in many instances, not even civil disobedience, just completely lawful protest, and wrapping that into something that gets criminalized at a penalty and a level that threatens people with decades in prison, with massive penalties, and then tries to reach even further out to wrap up larger groups of people. Then we saw more and more being passed in the wake of the movement for Black Lives and for millions of people taking to the streets across the United States after the murders in Ferguson, of George Floyd, of Eric Garner, to try and penalize things like people marching on highways or marching on streets. Again, time-honored actions that have moved this country forward over and over again now have penalties at a higher level to try and both frighten people from engaging in collective action and to punish people for engaging in collective action. Some of these proposed bills go so far as to eliminate liability for cars that drive into protests and kill people. There is a law in West Virginia that they passed that was limiting liability for police officers who kill people in the context of protests at the Capitol. This was enacted after the teachers in West Virginia so heroically led this movement for teachers and workers' rights in West Virginia. And that was the response from the state legislature. So that this gives you an idea of what the efforts are to attack our movements for justice around the country and try and stifle people and stop people from organizing. But of course, human liberation can't be stopped. I mean, people continue to organize, people will continue to get in the streets, people will continue to fight. So our organization and other organizations around the country are organizing and have been organizing to fight back against these laws, to fight back both by challenging them legally in the courts, affirmatively saying, looking at the law and saying these laws are illegal and we are, working to take them down just based on how they're written, or in other circumstances, defending people who have been charged under these laws to try and both protect the individual, but to also then have the laws declared unconstitutional in the context of their application. So these are some of the fight back measures. There's also another type of law that we've seen that's really important to talk about, and it's these anti-boycott laws. Now, those started to attack the movement in solidarity with human rights for Palestinians. And so the BDS movement, as people may be familiar with, is a nonviolent boycott, divest, and sanctions movement. Boycotts in the United States, again, a time-honored tradition. If you look back at the Montgomery bus boycott or at Chavez's great boycott, or so many others that have, again, turned our society. And here, where advocates in the United States were joining with the BDS movement, these right-wing legislators began passing laws to criminalize or to penalize people who engaged in boycott by saying that if you wish to engage in any contract with a state, you had to basically sign a loyalty oath, giving up your right to boycott. And the other type of law they passed was that the state itself would withdraw any funds from any entity or any pension funds from any entity or any investment that had any affiliation with any type of BDS movement. And it's requiring people to actually give up their First Amendment rights or to take a political stand in opposition to their own views in order to satisfy a government interest, which is just facially unconstitutional. The government simply can't tell you what you may think or what political activities you may or may not engage in. Now, those laws are being word for word adapted in the last couple of years and now applied to people that are engaged in efforts to boycott the fossil fuel industry. So now we're seeing the exact same language of the anti-BDS laws being used to punish anyone that engages in a boycott of the fossil fuel industry, including any investment firms or ESG funding that may seek to invest in something outside of fossil fuels. And all of these laws, over and over again, we find are being written by ALEC, a group that I'm sure many are familiar with. So this is sort of the lay of the land in terms of these massive attacks that are part and parcel of the same type of attack we see with the type of SLAPP attacks that occurred against Greenpeace, and that, as Deepa pointed out, had occurred against a lot of just individual folks who in a small community try and stand up against a massive corporate polluter, and the weight of the corporation comes to shut them down. And then they went after Greenpeace on a massive scale. These types of attacks on our basic First Amendment rights are, as I said, intended to chill. They're intended to silence. They're intended to frighten people. But the most important thing that we can do, in addition to fighting in the courts and fighting in other ways that we can and fighting in legislatures, is actually for people to say that they're not going to be afraid. And it's, as Deepa pointed out, the place that these are coming from is coming from, as she said, a position of fear from big corporate entities. And that's true. It's coming from the corporations. It's coming from a neo-fascist right wing that wants to shut down First Amendment actions and the power of the people. It's a recognition that when we have millions of people in the street, that is a power that is undeniable. It is a power that is unassailable. and that frankly, it is a majority power for fighting for things that move our country forward. It always has, it always will be. And this is exactly why they are passing these laws. And this is exactly why the most important thing that we can do, really going back to this own organization, is the concept of a political revolution. It's the concept of a political revolution where masses and masses of people, millions and millions of people, just say, we're not afraid, we're not going to be silent, we're going to march for what we believe in. It becomes that powerful force that is too much to be reckoned with. That's what they're trying to stop. And the antidote to that is to not let them stop us.
That's right. And so, Mara, is there any like federal legislation around this? Is there any effort, at the sort of federal level to try and address some of the stuff that's happening at the state level?
Well, it's difficult to address at a state level by federal legislation. So you can, where a state law is in and of itself unconstitutional, then you have a constitutional right that extends and sort of basically overrides a state law to, in a basic way. But it's difficult for there to be federal legislation that addresses state laws, except in as much as there could be restrictions on funding. There could be restrictions on federal funding for local police departments or other types of funding. Those type of things, those are possible, but politically highly unlikely. I think the difference really is going to come from the people in the streets, because that's where it always comes from, to tell you the truth.
No, that's right. And look, that's what we're all about here, right? At our revolution, trying to put folks out to fight things like the dirty deal, Manchin's dirty deal, and other things. So, Mara, is there anything our folks can do in this moment to try and help out and fight back on these anti-protest bills?
I think it's important to look at your own state and see what laws are being passed. And if you're seeing these, regressive laws being passed, I do think there is work that you can do to fight against them. And where you see that they're being proposed, you can help organize against them. But I also, just on a national level, I do want to mention, and just briefly, for folks that aren't aware, please be aware of what's happening in Atlanta with Cop City, where activists are being charged with these extraordinarily outrageous, completely bogus terrorism charges. This is an attack on the First Amendment completely. This is an attack of a scale that we certainly haven't seen in any sort of recent years of protest. And it's something that all of us need to be organizing in solidarity with the folks that are under attack in Atlanta, because if they're succeeding there, we can also guess that this will be the model, that will be a model to begin just starting to, go after anyone, anywhere, and charge them with massive terrorism offenses when there's zero basis for that kind of charge.
Yeah, no, this is a real threat, I think, to our rights and a real threat to our ability to speak up and push back against things that we find, egregious. So, Mara, I really appreciate you joining us here tonight and briefing us on what's happening across the country around anti-protest bills. So, thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure being here. Thanks for having me.
All right. And so, speaking of mobilizing and getting folks on the streets, as I mentioned at the top of the call, our revolution members played a role in killing Manchin's dirty deal, not once, not twice, but 3 times, by lighting up the phones in Congress, telling everybody, senators, members of Congress, that, allowing more permits for fossil fuel extraction is not the right way to go when it comes to our planet. And I thought, at least I thought we were done for a little bit, but I was wrong, right? The fossil fuel industry is powerful and pushing forward. And now we have a bill coming up in Congress here pretty soon, which we can't call Manchin's dirty deal anymore because it's not his. It's really being pushed by House Republicans. And I want to welcome Ariel Mojer, who's the Government and Political Affairs Director at Friends of the Earth, to give us a little bit of a briefing on what's going on. I'll give us an update on what's going on with HR 1. Ariel, how are you today?
Hi, I'm good. Hopefully you all can
Good.
hear me.
We can. You sound great. So tell us a little bit about what's going on, and tell us a little bit about HR 1. What's so terrible about it?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me. I wish it was for a happier topic, but it's always great to be in community with you all. Especially as Paco mentioned, last year, Friends of the Earth was so proud to fight alongside groups like RREV and frontline communities to help defeat Joe Manchin's dirty deal, as was noted 3 times, which is honestly, I think, before I launch into the next fight, I want to just take a moment to celebrate, because that's almost unheard of. Manchin often gets whatever he wants. So the fact that we were able to defeat him more than 1 time is pretty incredible. So credit to the activists and the ability to mobilize in order to bring about that victory, or those victories. But as was also noted, sadly, our work is not done. And later this week, Republicans in the US House of Representatives are going to bring a new piece of legislation that's even worse than the Manchin dirty deal that we fought last year. And we need to show up again in full force to make sure that it dies in the US Senate. So let me tell you more about this Dirty Deal 2.0. On paper, it's officially HR 1, but we're calling it what it is, which is the Polluters Over People Act. So this dirty and dangerous energy package is one of the GOP's top priorities. And unsurprisingly, it is a giant giveaway to corporate polluters who couldn't care less about American consumers, our public health, or obviously the climate crisis. The Polluters Over People Act is full of handouts and loopholes to the oil, gas, and mining industries, giving them extra incentives to further pollute the planet and impede the just transition to renewable energy that we so desperately need. So here are just some of the horrible things in this package, and it is a monster piece of legislation. So I'm just giving you a little preview. But first thing I wanted to highlight is that it tries to open up even more of our public lands and waters to extraction. So it mandates lease sales. And the worst part is that big oil is already hoarding thousands of unused leases on millions of acres of public lands. So we don't even need it. We don't need to sell off more of our public lands and waters to big oil and gas, because they're just sitting on top of literally millions of acres and have the potential to extract in the future from those lease sales that they're not even utilizing. Not to mention that any more extraction is just going to continue us down this path towards climate catastrophe. So it's bad morally, but it's also, like I said, just it's unnecessary given what big oil and gas already has. Second, the second thing I want to point out is that the bill seeks to accelerate the build out of fossil fuel export infrastructure. So not only are we destroying our planet by continuing to extract dirty energy, but we're also ripping off American consumers by selling oil and gas overseas. So we're being locked in to the climate catastrophe, all while big oil and gas executives are lining their pockets and making record profits. And don't forget that this is all on top of billions of dollars in US taxpayer subsidies that these industries are receiving from the federal government already. So it's just another example of corporate greed at its finest. A third item I wanted to mention, which is, I think, the most relevant given the discussion of the dirty deal that we had earlier, is that this bill seeks to once again gut our bedrock environmental laws by calling it permitting reform. So this is a purposeful misnomer to hide dangerous intentions. When pro-polluter politicians say permitting reform, and I'm putting that in air quotes, they actually mean weakening our environmental laws like the National Environmental Policy Act, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, and more. What they really want is to make it easier for polluters to fast track toxic projects and silence public input in the decision-making process. So they want to make sure that our voices cannot be heard. They want to make it easier for corporations to harm us and then silence us. So I just want to reiterate, please don't fall for the lies when they say that permitting reform is good for the clean energy transition. If anything, it does the opposite, because as I said, it just makes it easier to build fossil fuel projects and other harmful projects in often frontline communities, which are often the suffering from existing infrastructure and environmental racism. So just a little example, if you want to hear just how ridiculous this pro-polluter bill is, there's literally a provision that would allow industries to conduct their own environmental reviews, bypassing public health and safety standards. So it's pretty obvious of a giveaway, and could not be a more blatant attack on our environment. So that's all very bleak and unfortunate, but there are things that we can do. We must stay engaged and keep fighting. So with HR 1 soon going to unfortunately pass out of the House because there is a majority Republican. The House of Representatives is under Republican control. So we're expecting that HR 1 will pass out of the House later this week, probably on around Thursday. It will then go over to the US Senate. But this is why our collective opposition is so crucial, because too often Democrats vote the wrong way on dirty energy legislation. And it was Manchin has a D behind his name. He's a Democrat. So there's always a risk that when it goes to the Senate, there's no guarantee that they won't take pieces, especially of the anti-environment provisions that and pass that out of the Senate. So given that there is a danger, we must remain vigilant in our opposition and voice our concerns to our leaders. So not only do we need to fight HR 1, but we also must make it clear that we oppose any bill that seeks to gut our environmental laws and take away our ability to participate in important federal decisions. So just to give you a little bit of timing for the actions that you can take this week, you should call your representative and tell them to vote no on HR 1. As I mentioned, even though we know this will pass, we still want to make a statement, and this will not be the last bad energy bill that gets a vote in the House. So we want to make sure that our leaders know where we stand and that they do the right thing. And then starting next week, you can call your senators and tell them, as I said already, that they must oppose all proposals that seek to put polluters over people. No exceptions. So with that, I'd love to hand it back to Paco and see if there's any questions or anything else. Thank you all.
Yeah, so Ariel, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Ariel, so much for joining us tonight. I really appreciate it. So, what, in your opinion, right, or what's your take? I mean, it's going to get through the House. It's pretty much a done deal, right?
Yeah.
So what do we need to do on the Senate side, right? I know we've got some champions on the Senate side, folks like Senator Merkley and others
Yes.
that are likely to take a stand on it. Who are some of the other folks that you think will have to put a little bit of pressure on around this issue?
Well, to be honest, if you look at the Manchin dirty deal fight that we had last year, far too many Democratic senators for my liking voted for his dirty deal. Even though we successfully defeated it, I don't think we should take any vote for granted. So every Democratic senator should be hearing constantly from us. And especially, I kept emphasizing that permitting reform is a misnomer. It's a distraction. It's a deceptive term that's used in order to try and convince people to vote for something that basically silences communities. And in order to expedite projects, whether it's clean energy or dirty energy, that's where we lose a lot of our Democratic champions and allies. So I think just emphasizing that public input is vital to a healthy democracy. You know, I caught the tail end of the last speaker, and it's just, this is another version of us being able to participate in our democracy. And especially when these projects directly impact us and our future, we should continue to have a voice. So I would say my take is no Democratic senator should be taken for granted or assume that they're on our side. They should be hearing constantly from us. And that is actually how we won so much. How we had those 3 victories last year was because it was constant, and we just made sure that we were loud and clear about our position.
And we will be doing it again. All the folks here, everybody else that's in our revolution world, along with Greenpeace, Friends of the Earth, some of the frontline communities, Power, and other organizations that have been really involved in this. We'll be doing it again.
Yes.
And so keep an eye on your phones. You might get a text from us. You might get an email. You might get both. It's that level of urgency here, and make sure that we're calling all our senators. So, Ariel, so thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Thank you for that awesome and very informative presentation on what's in the bill and what we need to do to stop it. And I look forward to continuing to work with you and Friends of the Earth and the rest of the fossil fuel coalition, anti-fossil fuel coalition, to keep this and defeat it for the 4th time. So we can do it.
Yes, I thank you again for having me, and I'm just ecstatic to be in the community with you all, because what we do really does make a difference, and it's incredibly motivating to me. So thank you again.
All right. Well, I hope everybody learned a little bit about what's happening in Congress, learned a little bit about SLAPP suits and anti-protest bills moving all over the country, and that you guys feel inspired to try to take action. If you want to help protect the right to protest, protect our democracy, protect our planet, you can become a member of our revolution. And we have a lot of work to do. We have to push back against these corporate and right-wing attacks on our planet. And we're very grateful to all our members, our sustaining members that already help us. And I mentioned, if you can't become a member, there's other ways that you guys can get involved. So we've got a huge race, a political race in Chicago. Brandon Johnson could potentially become the next mayor. I read a headline in an article in The Nation earlier today, which says that he's gaining momentum and catching up against his opponent. Brandon is a longtime ally, a former public school teacher, a union organizer, and he's currently within striking distance of being able to beat a horrible corporate Democrat who calls himself, and I quote, more of a Republican. The future of Chicago is really at stake, and we can help tip the balance in this race and make sure Brandon defeats an anti-choice, anti-public school, right-wing Democrat who has been funded by big banks and the police unions. Bernie Sanders, our inspiration here at our revolution, is joining Brandon for some events this week in Chicago. And while we can't all be there, we can help from anywhere by making some phone calls. So That link is getting dropped in the chat. You can join our phone bank force in support of Brandon Johnson. Also, next Tuesday, a week from tomorrow, we've got a big election day for progressives across the country. Not only is the future of Chicago on the ballot, but we've also got candidates on the ballot for city council in St. Louis. It's actually called a board of aldermen there, but that's what it is in city council. And in Kansas City, Missouri, which have both become hotbeds of progressive activism. Unfortunately, the state itself, Missouri, is also becoming a test ground for extremist legislation from the right at the state level. So we have a chance to build progressive power locally, and we can help push back against the gerrymandered legislature that controls the state. You can help us by making calls to St. Louis for our endorsed candidates for city council there. We currently have a progressive majority and we need to keep it. So help us keep it there. What has happened in St. Louis is, one of the first things they passed was a basic income pilot program. They've been passing and debating, renter protections and some other housing issues. So these are, labs of experimentation at the local level. And if these bills are successful, they can move up to the federal level. So help us keep this majority in St. Louis. We can make a huge difference there. And in Kansas City, we're organizing a call with Our Revolution Kansas City, ORKC. They are going to have some of their candidates on a call coming up here on Wednesday. So you can join them. That link is getting dropped in the chat now. And while I'm here and talking about calls, we might as well tell you that we have our next call 2 Mondays from now, where we will be joined by Helen Gim, who is running. She's currently an at-large member of the Philadelphia City Council, but she's going to be running for mayor of Philadelphia. And we're going to be hearing from her in a couple of weeks about what's going on there. And to catch all the links that we dropped in this meeting today, and the latest news on our movement and what Our Revolution is up to, sign up to become, to receive the biweekly Revolution report that hits inboxes on Saturdays, especially this Saturday, we have one coming out. That link to sign up is getting dropped in the chat right now. And of course, you can always follow us on social media. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel. Those links are getting dropped in the chat right now as well. You can follow us on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram. And so now we're at 9:30 on the dot. And as we do for every call that we have here at Our Revolution, I know you can now unmute yourselves and that would be chaos on Zoom, but believe me, I can feel it when I hear people in California, in Florida, Alaska saying this. So let's get it started. When we organize,
we win.
When we organize,
we win.
When we organize,
we win.
All right. Good night, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Night, everybody.
Recording stop.